So, you want to get a world record in zombies. Like I explained in my last video, if you want to beat the world record on many maps, it's really about beating the reset. But that's not true for all maps. On World at War, the reset is something you want to care about, although on Noctur and Toten and Verrückt, it's really more about not dying, since the reset hasn't been hit yet. On Black Ops 1, the reset is something you care about on pretty much every map, except for Noctur and Toten, where you're trying to beat the box error and the survival map. On Black Ops 3, it's really just a race to 255, and the only map where you have to worry about some type of error is Gorod Krovi, but that's not a reset. On Black Ops 4, some of the maps have errors that aren't really avoidable, but the ones that don't have reset times that are so absurdly long that I don't think a single one has been hit yet. And on Black Ops Cold War, we'll just have to wait and see with that one. But right now, all that leaves is Black Ops 2. To break down Black Ops 2, all of the survival maps, including Bus Depot, Town, Farm, and Nuketown, have a reset time, except none of them have been hit except for Town. Mob of the Dead also has a reset time which has been hit, so all that's left for us to discuss is Tranzit, Die Rise, Buried, and Origins. So what do you know, Mr. Tagged or Toten? Why are you making this video? Well, I have a theory. This is a theory that I like to call the moving parts theory. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So, the last four maps we have to discuss. Tranzit, Die Rise, Buried, and Origins. What do they have in common? They all have an error. Buried has the longest error, usually occurring at over 80 hours in-game. Then Tranzit, which can vary depending on certain circumstances. Followed by Die Rise, which is kind of hard simply because the late game strategy is so difficult that almost all of the recent world records have been because of death. The only latest world record was 26 hours at an error. And then lastly there's Origins, which is usually an error at about 26 hours. Now what do these four maps have in common? Well, that's where the name of the theory comes from. They all have what I like to call moving parts. Now what do I mean by moving parts? Well, let's take a look. Tranzit has this bus that is constantly cycling around the map, and while it can interact with the player, it moves independent of the player. Similarly, Die Rise has 7 elevators that are constantly moving up and down the buildings, and while they can interact with the player, they are independent of the player. Origins has 3 1,000-foot-tall robots that are constantly cycling around the map, and while they can interact with the player, they aren't controlled by the player. Buried we will touch on in a bit. So all four of these maps have what I call these moving parts that I defined as interactable with the player but moving independently of the player. And all four of these maps also have errors that are seemingly unavoidable. Is this a coincidence? Well, my theory says I don't think so. Basically, I believe that the less moving parts there are on a map, the less likely it is to error. Origins having 3 massive robots cycling around the map, plus probably some other moving parts, is what contributes to the extremely low error time. The same could be said for Die Rise's 7 elevators. Tranzit also has the bus, but since the bus itself is smaller than the 7 elevators combined, or the 3 massive robots, that's why Tranzit's error time is much longer than the other 2 maps. Well, what does this mean? Surely there isn't anything we can do about all of this. Well, for Tranzit and Origins, yeah, probably not. But for Die Rise, we recently saw it happen actually. Unesco recently beat the world record by 9 rounds, and by quite a bit of in-game time. How was he able to do it? He played the first 125 rounds of the game with no power, therefore decreasing the number of elevators constantly moving around the map from 7 to just 1. That alone pushed his error time much later than in any other game, and who knows how much further he could have made it if he had never turned on the power. Now the next question you might be asking, of course, is what other moving parts are there potentially to save? Well, I think this bounces off of a similar theory that many people have had in the past. Many people have believed that buildables play a big part in how long it takes a map to error. On Tranzit, Die Rise, and Buried, there has always been this belief that buildables are more likely to lead to errors, and what you want to do is to push as late as possible into the game without using buildables, so that you can push your error time much later. This original belief actually plays into my theory perfectly, because it's very likely that these buildables also contribute towards this moving parts. This could be supported by Blaster's recent buried no-powered world record, in which he used only the trample steam for the entire game, because that's how the rules of no power work, and, while doing so, used less moving parts and didn't error for much longer than most other players. Unfortunately, he ended up dying instead of actually hitting the point of error, but it's widely believed that he could have made it much further than the regular world record. Simply, the trample steam counts as less moving parts than the turbine and resonator combined. That, along with the fact that there might be some additional moving parts that are turned on when you turn on the power, like the pack-a-punch, for example. Some other moving parts that might contribute to this overall might include the pylons on Tranzit, Diarize, and Buried, the moving walls in the Crazy Place on Origins, the generators on Origins, the tank on Origins, and possibly the jet gun, although I'm not sure since that's actually a weapon you hold instead of just a buildable you place down. So where do we go from here? Well, that's where you guys come in. This is all just a theory, and I haven't actually really done much testing on it yet. We have a little bit of evidence to support it, but that's why I'm making this video, to spread the word. I believe that this is a big part of the reason why the errors happen on Black Ops 2. And now I'm leaving it up to the community to start testing this, start practicing this, and if we're lucky, maybe start pushing the world record. The best thing that we can do currently is to save as many moving parts as possible, wherever we can. On Origins, that might potentially mean building all of the stabs and doing the Easter egg to get rid of those moving walls, although I'm not sure how much those actually play into the error. On other maps, it might mean playing no power, or simply using less buildables wherever possible. And keep in mind that I could be completely wrong about all of this. It just seems like too much of a coincidence that these 4 maps that experience errors have this in common, and more importantly, that Diarize and Origins, which experience the most errors, have the most moving parts. But, hey, that's just a theory. A zombies theory. I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you've learned something today. Or maybe not. Maybe I could be completely wrong. Anyway, if you want to check me out on Twitch, my link will be down in the description, twitch.tv/MrJZM. If you're watching this shortly after it's uploaded, I'll be playing lots of Buried No Power, practicing and hopefully seeing if I can push the record. With a little bit of practice, you can go a long way. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and peace.